who read like at least like the introduction that I posted? All right, cool. That's like 3 people. Nice, thanks guys. If I write something up here and you don't understand what I wrote, I'll rewrite it because my handwriting is kind of sloppy. But it was written by Homer, who is a Greek poet. He also wrote the Odyssey, which is another like epic poem, and they're both based around the Trojan War, which was most people agree is a somewhat mythical war that apparently took place in the 12th century BC or somewhere around there. Homer is another character that we don't really know when he was born. Most people consider him to be alive around the 8th century BC. Both of these stories were probably about the earliest Greek literature written that we have. Some stuff might have been destroyed or something like that. All right. The main character of the part in the book is just like a couple of the parts. It's a really long story, but they gave you like a couple of the chapters. Achilles he's considered the main character, and his name actually means something like the grief of the people, so he is sort of considered the hero of grief. And the part I gave you to read, The Rage of Achilles, you don't see it as much, but throughout the rest of the story, there's multiple times when someone close to him dies, and he'll like lay on the beach and rip his hair out and things like that. Like, he really represents like all the bad things that happen in war, and even though he is considered to be like the greatest fighter, and all the Trojans are scared of him, but Agamemnon, the king of the Greeks, actually takes some of his prizes away that he earned in war, and so he gets angry at him, hence the Rage of Achilles, and he will not fight anymore. Let's see. This is also where the phrase Achilles' heel comes from, which is something that we use now to kind of describe like a big weakness. But in the original Iliad, there is no mention of him being dipped in the river Styx, which is what his mother apparently did in one story to give him like invulnerability from the heel down. She held him like by his ankles and like dipped him, and there's a story that was written in the 1st century AD, I believe, that stated he got hit in the heel with an arrow and he died from it, which is kind of interesting considering he was like the best. Let's see. When you look through the story here, it's a poem, but it's not really written like most poems that we read today, like Robert Frost or anything like that. Most of it is long dialogues between 2 characters. So in the Rage of Achilles, it's between Agamemnon and Achilles. And one thing, it's almost written like a play without being a play. Like, it has, like, it's like if you take, say, Medea, where it's all like Medea says this and then next hero says this. It's like that, except it's long monologues between the characters, and it's kind of interesting that they he wrote it like that. And I think it kind of points to, in Greek culture, they really enjoyed like the art of arguing and things like this, and they actually they would have these people called sophists who would come in, and they would be paid to teach their children how to, like, the art of arguing. So going in front of people and like explaining things, because the main part of their culture had to do with their government, which was mostly a representative government. So it was like the men who owned land could go and all discuss what they wanted to vote on. And so one really influential person could maybe change the minds of other people, and so they had more power. And it's a lot, let's see. Yeah, I mean, that's just different than a lot of the other, like, tales we've written, because this was to be a narrative, but there's very little actual like storytelling, I guess, it's besides what happens between the characters. Because this all takes place, the Trojan War was supposed to be a 10-year war, and this takes place right near the end, but doesn't even cover the end. It's just like the part that happens between Agamemnon and Achilles, and things that happen between them and Achilles' friend Patroclus, who gets killed. But another thing is, in these transitions between the characters, they have, each time there's a new paragraph or a new set of dialogue, there's, it says, so for example, it says, an Agamemnon the warlord, or an Achilles breaking in on him. They have like, sort of like a description of what's going on before this happens, and that's, like, it kind of leads you into like the mood of the character that once they go on this dialogue. And there's multiple times where they'll use sort of like it's almost like a title. It's like a way of describing who the character is. Like they call Achilles the sure-footed instead of Achilles a lot, and they call him godlike and things like this because he's so like he's trying to give you like a feeling for how the character is to everyone else. Another thing that's a big deal in the story is glory and honor. It's sort of like his whole anger towards Agamemnon happens because he feels like Agamemnon is taking away his glory because he earned the rewards that he had, which includes people that he like took, like slaves and things like that. But he took away Briseis, who was a female slave that he stole. But he was so angry about this that he was just going to sit by his ship and wait until, I guess, the Greeks lost. He even asked Zeus to give the Trojans the advantage that they would destroy the Greeks, because he was so angry. He also really questioned, this was publicly too, at least within like the major generals, he questioned Agamemnon's like want of power because he was the king, but he never did anything for himself. He would just sit in the back and order people around and then take their prizes that he won. Because Achilles was, he thought he was the best, and he was, and so he just thought he should have the most rewards. And he definitely let Agamemnon know that. Another part of this that's important is the relationship between the gods and the men in this. The first book I had you read, it's not as obvious, but later on there's moments where the gods really change like the outcome of an event just because they are either jealous or angry, and it kind of personifies the gods in a way that is very evil almost, or crafty, and it's really not like the way that monotheistic culture really describes God today. It's more of they're just immortals that wanted to like have fun, sort of. And there's one part where Hector, who is the Trojan, he's like the leader of the Trojans, he's the best fighter among them. He is trying to run away from Achilles because Achilles wants to kill him because he killed Patroclus, his best friend. And Athena actually takes the form of Hector's brother and tells him that he should keep fighting. Why not fight? You're better than him. And so he stops, turns around, and realizes that his brother's no longer there, and Achilles kills him. So it all had stemming back to sort of the fact that Athena doesn't like the Trojans because of Paris, who was his brother and took Agamemnon's brother's wife, which kind of is the reason for all this, but that's not really talked about much in this story, honestly. And another part that, again, isn't as relevant in like the part of the story they give you here, but there's a real like difference between sort of the way the gods want things to happen, and then he's trying to contrast this with the loss of human life that is so like apparent in the story. Like there's a lot of people dying back and forth, and people like crying, and there's a lot of people ripping their hair out, which is interesting. Kind of showing like the ultimate grief. And I think that's a real important part of this, is just showing how cruel the gods can be without necessarily, they're not really killing the people per se, but they're causing these things to happen just on a whim. And it's also speaking to like how human life isn't as important to them as it would be in a monotheistic culture, so to say. So like a monotheistic God would hopefully want the people to live happily, and the gods in this story at least are portrayed as very evil, crafty, as I said. Is there any questions? That was a lot of information, yeah?
Did you find anything about people believing that Homer was a group of people instead of just one?
Not from what I read, but I guess that it could be a possibility. I mean, we don't know like when he was born, but it seems like the Odyssey in this, which is the other thing he wrote, is sort of similar. I mean, the storyline kind of falls in. The Odyssey is when it's centered around Odysseus, who is one of Achilles' best friends after the Trojan War. So that's, I don't know, it's pretty similar. Another thing.
That's a really good question, because if we think about that in terms of all the texts that we're reading, how do we know that any of them had a single author? And what are some of the variables in the ancient world that would make us question that?
Well, for the Greeks, there is a couple times through their history that the Library of Athens was burned, and I think that kind of leads me to believe, at least, that some of the things that we have, like the fact that this is the earliest literature we have from them, doesn't really like say much to me. Like there could have been some things before, but they were just destroyed.
Well, it's a question that no one has sufficiently answered in here. Every single piece of literature that we study has an original text, has an original author or set of authors, and has an original translation or set of translations. What document or archival piece, whether it's a painting, inscriptions on a wall, a papyrus that's been burned, what was the original form of the piece of literature that you're presenting? And how did it come to pass that it ended up in your textbook? How many thousands of years are we talking about? Okay? Because every single piece that we've talked about so far has its own story. And that affects what, I'm sorry, what's your first name? Kelvin was getting at. Because, not you, Melvin. Because, for example, the original Old Testament was written in Hebrew. But did everyone in the ancient world speak Hebrew? Not very many people spoke Hebrew. So what was it translated into? Greek. They came first. But then it was translated into Latin. And how do we know that the translations were the same, or different? Who was responsible? What percentage of the population in the ancient world could read and write?
Probably like 1% at the most.
Yeah, just the absolute very, very tiniest amount. And also your question getting back to, did Homer write the whole thing? Probably not.
Right.
Who probably helped him write it? The actual inscription part.
Scribes.
Other people. Like he probably had a bunch of people.
Good, not animals.
Scribes.
Slaves did a lot of the scribe work. Okay, so every single one of you, when you present your topic or your text, you need to think about that. Where was the origin of the writing? Maybe there isn't one. Maybe the reason we know about the literature is that it was written about by other authors, and it was included in their writings, and that was how it was handed down. Okay, and so the question becomes, why? Why Homer's stories?